So welcome to the third in the series of summer series. These were sessions that we wanted to do that focused on four areas of PMO that people were finding most challenging. We've already done hybrid delivery. Gosh, that was a slog, wasn't it, Eileen? You loved that one.
Well, it was some interesting conversations in hybrid delivery.
Yeah, and you can catch those on the members library, but you can also see that in our free libraries. If you're not yet a member, we are sharing the summer series because this reason, it's open to anybody anyway. So you can also catch the recordings on the free library if you're not already a full member. Second one was about benefits management, and that one's literally just gone out today. So again, if benefits management is one of those things that you are grappling with at the moment, a lot of great insights in there. You'll be able to see the recording, but also some notes that kind of summarize a lot of the stuff that was caught. But also from that, we've got a couple of actions that have come out of it, which have given us ideas as to what kind of events people want to see coming out of benefits management and stuff, which is great. So we're now on to the third one, which is obviously resource management. And again, the similar thing is that you're going to be taken through what we're trying to capture and get to the real crux of the matter of where we're getting problems with resource management, which then allows us to maybe schedule further events that get into some detail, or we share different artifacts or papers or whatever it might be. We can really get into the detail. So Eileen, do you want to introduce yourself and what's happening this evening?
Well, I don't know whether I need to introduce myself. Eileen Roden, here with Lindsay as part of House of PMO. I kind of decide when I say I don't want to introduce myself whether that sounds hugely arrogant or just people, when I do introduce myself, people say, yeah, Eileen, we've kind of been on for ages. So anyway, my name's Eileen Roden. I work with Lindsay with the House of PMO, lead author of the competency framework and P3O best management practice. One of the interesting things about resource management is for a long time, benefits management was the top of the too hard pile. And in recent years, resource management seems to have eclipsed benefits management. So you'll notice benefits management and resource management, both elements that we covered off. And interesting in terms of a lot of the benefits management, there seems to be lots for people to do. Resource management still seems to be kind of very difficult for people to address. So tonight, as Lindsay said, this is not about us just kind of talking for the next 60 minutes or so. It very much is a collaboration and conversations around kind of what you've done and what you kind of think, and just responding to some of the other people's and what their suggestions might be. So because of that, I noticed most of you are playing shy banes, as we would say in the Northeast, and decided not to put your camera on. Now, that's fine if that's what your choice. Though I was going to say, Robert, I was very interested to know what your picture was that you had that represents you.
Oh, that is a story from the Bible of the ravens feeding Elijah the prophet when he ran away, when he was scared and ran away.
Okay, thank you very much. I was just, and is there a reason why you chose that picture? Always curious.
Because sometimes I'm scared and run away, and sometimes it also feels like God sends the ravens to feed me.
Okay, excellent. And it's always nice. And just we're going to do just a couple of hints, absolutely unrelated hints and tips today. As we kind of start this session. For those of you who've just got your name up there, yes, that's fine. However, for people like, if you could have a look at Adrian Smith, Adrian has actually got a picture of himself, and just for somebody who's delivering a webinar, if you're sitting in a meeting, it's actually quite nice to see people's faces. So if you don't want to take the camera off, it is quite nice to have some picture, or as Robert's got, some kind of representation that we can see. So just attach one to your name, and you can have people can kind of see lots of things. There you go. Ken's shown his picture as well, so quite a few of that about. Excellent. Excellent. Right then, that's the first tip. The second tip is this week I got a whole new tool that I found. I was doing a webinar and my face wasn't quite in the right place, and I've already seen somebody kind of play around with their camera. However, there is this lovely tool which I've downloaded and it appears to be safe, which as that hasn't gone in there. Let me just copy it again. I've obviously been doing something since I did it. This is a great tool you can download. So I'm sure it doesn't work with your laptop camera. However, if you're sitting in Zoom and you've got another camera, it allows you to play with your camera while you're in Zoom. Look at that. This is my new little toy this week, because I could never control my camera when I was in Zoom. The Logitech software for my particular camera didn't work. So there we go, my second hint and tip today. Right then. Now we've finished all of that. Normally we kind of ask people to say hello in chat, and we've already had some of that. Now today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the annotate functionality within Zoom. So for those of you who've been on these sessions before, apologies, we are going to do it again. But in the top menu, you'll see in your Zoom, you'll have something called Annotate, which when you click on it will bring up a sub menu. And if you click on text, it allows you then to go on the screen and type in, oh, I wish I could type, does let you type in text. So just pick a tab and just put your name on there just to make sure that you can use your annotate functionality. Now, if you're in Zoom and you're using it from the browser, unfortunately, this functionality doesn't work. So you can also, as Lindsay's done there, you can put kind of stars and love hearts. That's under the stamp. Under the draw, you can also do arrows and kind of connect things up if you so desire. There is an eraser if you want to rub things out, but I just really want to check that we've got the ability to do that. So as we go on and do the exercises, yep, and you can actually kind of select things and move them around. So if people get, oh look, Ken's got a man on there as well. There we go. So you can move them around. So where people have started typing, we can move them around. Everybody happy? Anybody struggling with the functionality? Everybody happy?
It looks like someone else came to my aid and moved my name.
That was me.
Thank you.
That's okay. I'm just getting everybody on so everybody can see that. Okay, right. And so now one of the reasons why we record this is so when we go back and do any kind of follow-up activity, we can see all of this, because what I have to do at the end of every screen is just to kind of delete that before we move on to the next slide. Otherwise, it takes it all on to the next slide. So in terms of what we're going to cover, as Lindsay said, we when we went off to this year's conference, we took a number of boards with us, and there were kind of 4 keyboards that we don't have to take off my animation menu before it lets me go on. 4 keyboards: hybrid delivery, benefits management, resource management, low maturity. We've covered off the first 2. Today we're doing resource management, and the low maturity one is booked for the 18th of August. So we started off with a clear sheet. Now, normally when we go to any shows or our conference, we usually used to go with kind of flip charts. And Lindsay came up with this fantastic graphic that talks about resource management. And we gave people lots of pens to try and encourage them to write various different sections on this big A-note sheet of paper. Now, the actual, as you'll see, Lindsay's got behind her, and she's going to continue adding to it. The actual kind of, we did get a number of people to contribute, which you can kind of see there. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of these sections, see what people wrote, take some further discussions from you. I might have a little bit of input from my experience, and we'll see what we get at the end, and then we'll discuss what we want to do with it. But I did think it was worth just clarifying the scope of the conversation in terms of resource management, because it can mean a multitude of things. And I think based on the conversations that we've had, all of these three elements were actually covered on the board. So the first bit is capacity management. So how do we make sure that we've got enough resources with the right skills from the delivery teams and across the business to actually deliver what we need? So that whole kind of capacity management, matching up supply and demand and that can be at typically at project or program level or organization level. It also covers what we call resource management in the competency framework, which is the allocation of individuals to projects and programs. So making sure that project managers have got the right skills available to each individual project and program. And, you know, even at that level of resource management from a PMO perspective, can be quite an interesting challenge in terms of how that's managed, particularly where there's dependencies between resources moving across projects and programs. Less so in the agile world, but even still, there's a number of issues to get the right team in there. And then finally, which tends to be something from a PMO we support through processes and systems and tools, also kind of the planning standards, is the resource allocation to individual tasks and activities. So you've got the top level, making sure they're available to do work on the portfolio. The middle level, which is kind of project managers have access to the right people to deliver their projects and programs. And then we've got the granular level, which is within projects and programs, putting people to individual tasks and activities. So quick question there in terms of demand management, you know, and I've been working on some other stuff this afternoon, and this is exactly the conversation I had in terms of some work I was doing as to whether demand management was actually seen as part of capacity management. So Stuart, you've got there that it's actually part of capacity.
I'm trying to find my unmute. You gave me a new tool to play with, and I'm trying to work out that. So yes, you would need the demand to link into the capacity. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to balance one against the other. So you can say, I have X number of people, and I've got Y number of demand, and then you can split that down by type, location, role, whatever suits your organization, but you need people to say what they want. And it is more interesting when your demand does not exceed your capacity. So suddenly you have a project or program that needs to go and had 100 people on it. What do you do with those people? So sometimes, you know, we all think capacity management is about what do we do to make sure that we can deliver all the stuff that we've got with the number of people. But when it works the other way around, that is really when you start to need the capacity management to understand of those people, are they all permanent? Are they temporary staff? So that you can see who you could possibly move on to other things, or who you could just exit the door, and when you could exit the door.
Thanks for that, Stuart. And certainly from a PMO competency framework, when we're looking at capacity management, it's about bridging that gap between supply and demand. And part of the challenge is getting the information so we can actually kind of bridge that gap. And a lot of the things that we'll come across tonight is not necessarily about what we would call capacity management, which is about kind of bridging that gap. It's actually getting the right information to understand what the demand is and what the supply is before we can actually kind of do that matching. And a lot of, I think, that what people kind of talk about in terms of the resource management is actually that information around demand, which, you know, we can often see as kind of the rolled up reporting and portfolio design rather than kind of capacity management. So interesting in terms of kind of people's perspective of resource management, and having had fun with the hybrid delivery, I just thought it was worth having that conversation at the beginning in terms of when we talk about resource management, what do we actually kind of mean by that? And as I say, I've just picked up some of the things from the competency framework to throw that into the conversation. But certainly the kind of the board often also thought about doing the demand management element as well, which is all the kind of the planning and schedule, as I said, and kind of rolled up reporting. So if we want to add that in as well, that's absolutely fine. No doubt that'll come up in some of the conversations. And I'm interested in terms of from before we go into that, just before Stuart's definitely in terms of resource management is supply and demand. I haven't added that in. Anybody else got any views in terms of what the scope of resource management is within their PMO, the services that they provide?
Isn't capability? Where's that fit?
Well, from the competency framework, we have a separate competency called capability development, which says if we haven't got the right skills and capabilities and we're putting together a resource strategy for how we're going to resource the projects, then we need to think about, are we going to kind of purchase them in, or we're going to develop them? And so part of that is capacity management, part of that sits in capability development. But even if it's not aligned to capacity management, looking at the development plans and development paths from across the organisation are also part of within the PMO role as well, in my view. Sorry, I answered that. I don't know whether you're asking me, Lindsay.
Well, you said, is there anything missing? And that was the obvious one for me.
Okay. Any other views, comments? They're all equally valid. Stuart, you can't give me a book title because you know I'm going to go and buy it.
Sorry, I did put a book title on the chat. I got given this by PlanView, so it's not a plant. I actually find it a useful book. It's the only book that probably explains how to do things around resource management, and I know it's useful because I've got a couple of the pages actually bookmarked, so that I would recommend in the copy I've got page 118 and page 126. So it's well worth a read, and it's not that big considering some of the books I've produced. It's a mere couple of hundred pages, and it is actually readable.
Okay, great.
Excellent. There we go. Right then. Anybody got any other suggestions? Got a question there from Nicole. Clear definitions of who is in the resource pool. Yes, and certainly one of the things that I was looking at was about some of the challenges between differentiating the utilisation and availability of people who are seen to be in the delivery team, whatever that looks like, and subject matter experts from business as usual. And my assumption is that that's included in that. Right then, Ken Burrell, you're talking sexy at me. What's all of your lovely acronyms in there?
Well, apologies for exciting you, Eileen. I wouldn't want to do that on a Tuesday evening. But I'm thinking it's about types and subtypes of resource. So, for example, if you're including say IT development resources in your forecasting, are all developers made equal, or are there things like web developers, Pega developers, database developers? Are they, different flavors of developers and different flavors of resource types like business analysts? Yes. So types and subtypes, would that need to be captured?
Right, and I think once we get into the various sections,
Okay.
we look at that, because I think some of the things as well that I was looking at this afternoon, it was interesting in terms of whether we actually want to do kind of resourcing and capacity management for every single type of resource, or actually just single points of failure. So where we've got kind of some real bottlenecks of resources in our organisation, if that might be the first step. So, but let's see what we've got on the board, and we'll go from there. So, first section was about what's the real challenge, and I have to say this was the most populated part of the board. People were very keen to actually kind of write up what those kind of real challenge from, right from, kind of some of the, yes, Robert, we can see your chats. The real kind of issues of kind of the data that we get, right through to kind of cultural issues of things like people don't like being tracked. Yeah. Political issues around and cultural issues around, kind of business as usual is always more important than project work, or vice versa, depending on what your organisation that you're in. So we've got the post-it notes down the side, open to discussion in terms of what's in the list. Anybody can anybody articulate succinctly any other key challenges that haven't been included in the list?
One challenge we're having is the dimension of how many different projects are people assigned to.
Okay. So that's where, that age-old issue of we don't have one single person on one project. They've got kind of multiple project assignments. Now, interestingly, when we talked about hybrid delivery, one of the interesting sessions we had on there was an argument why people had agile teams, is that actually because you're fully assigned, you were left there on a team and stayed there. One of the anybody else got anything else? Just before I go on to, because I could talk about this all night. It's a fascinating subject.
I've got one. So there is often a situation in which people are doing work on a project, but the project hasn't been formally authorized yet. So there's no cost code or project code or anything like that to track against, or people shouldn't be booking time against it, but they have to, kind of thing. There's a bit of a tension there sometimes.
Does that cover it?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So I think this is interesting, is it, in terms of what level we're doing resource allocation. So my head's been working at kind of portfolio level, because at portfolio level, it forces us to start looking at projects before they're even projects, because we have to know that to be able to put them at kind of a portfolio level. Once we've got that, then actually we need to start thinking down in the individual project level is about what people are doing on a day-to-day basis, where things like kind of multiple projects assignments, how do we split that? Because the data is so dynamic. Yes, and one of the things that we've certainly looked at when I've been working out, when I used to do a real job, a lot of the things that we had here was about planned versus dynamic data. Yes, in terms of what we used when we were doing planning. So the cycle of the planning process and how often that was. I don't want to use the. I'll create a new phrase, soft baseline. Yes. So when the project manager did a replanning exercise, still within the overall kind of baseline, but baseline to the next level of detail for the next month's activity or the next 6 weeks activity. And then you can use that kind of fixed data versus the kind of the weekly or the daily dynamic data as people are blocking it. What came across from this was actually these are real kind of technical issues that we have on a daily basis. Are there any fundamental causes to challenges with resource management? And just that second bullet point to me says people don't like to feel tracked. To me is a kind of a fundamental issue that underpins and causes some of all of the other issues. Anybody suggest any other fundamental issues that are causing this problem? I'm gonna suggest one. Yeah. Can I suggest that?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. And I think to me, balanced with that one, is also, I'll use the word people, which I think is another one that we often find, and we could argue that it's senior managers, but I don't think it's just senior managers, is that we don't like the answers that we come up with when we actually do the planning. And sometimes when we do bottom-up planning, which, people argue is the most, can be the most accurate, can also be the most plumped out planning, because almost every kind of level then adds in an amount of kind of slack that makes the final the final estimate actually kind of much bigger than we truly need. Yeah.
The thing I don't see in here at all is anything about people's responsibilities. And one of the key failures I'm finding at the moment, please don't look up where I work, is that people are not accountable for doing things. So we have line managers who are responsible for people. We have activity managers who are responsible for saying this person works over here. Now, if you're going to get your project approved, I only need 3 people. I might have 5 people working on it, and who can tell you? Now, in an organisation of 30 people, that's easy. In an organisation of 30,000, that becomes a bit more tricky. So it's about making sure that we have the responsibilities sorted.
Okay.
I think
I've got a point along similar lines. I was going to say lack of ownership of the senior, subject matter experts on projects. In my organisation, they are relying on the actual project manager to assign and manage tasks, whereas, in my opinion, as the PMO, it should be the senior subject matter experts who should be saying, well, to hit this milestone, this is what we need to deliver, and then plan backwards accordingly, whereas they're giving all the responsibility onto the project managers to say, we've got 20 days to hit this milestone and plan 20 days in, but then getting to that milestone and going, oh yeah, but we've not done this. And the project manager goes, well, I didn't know we had to do that. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, and that goes back to, isn't it, in terms of kind of the technical input into the project, in terms of sometimes kind of how we do things needs technical expertise that the project manager doesn't necessarily have. So you need that technical expertise not only to define the kind of the detailed activities that need to be done on the plan, but also the level of skill and expertise that's required by individuals. And often what's missed from that as well is that any kind of check-in and assurance that they've actually kind of done what's required in the right way.
I liked Robert's point about the time, about an hour is not an hour. I know that's your favourite, one of your favourite things, isn't it, Eileen? You don't call them hours, what do you call them?
Well, dollops of time is my kind of. I work on the principle, and I've always done it here. Is that whenever I've kind of been playing with timesheets, everybody has 4 dollops of time a day, before coffee and after coffee, before tea and after tea. And regardless of how many kind of hours that works out as individuals. And if you're really bad, then you've got a dollop in the evening as well. But we only ever kind of do the 4 dollops really. But to me, there's some kind of real fundamental issues, and what we're seeing here is really the symptoms of some of those fundamental issues. And often, perhaps some of our approaches are dealing with the symptoms rather than dealing with the underlying cause. And depending on where you sit within your PMO, if you're sitting at kind of director and manager level, perhaps your focus should be more on some of those kind of fundamental underlying issues rather than actually some of the tactical things that perhaps our analysts can work through with a bit of our support. So I just think that was definitely worth looking at. What's the general view on timesheets as an issue in terms of implementing them versus people filling them out? And I say that because I once had the joy of trying to roll out timesheets globally and just recognise that there are different views of timesheets depending on which country you're trying to roll out timesheets in. Different. There's some very kind of cultural issues around that. So, what are some of the issues about being tracked that we perhaps kind of come up against? Agree, Stuart?
I think that a couple of them can be explained by some things that are on here, which is that hours equals value plus waste. So if you can't account for value, then the remainder must be waste. People feel a bit exposed by that, and a few above. So people don't like to see the truth, which kind of ties in with those two things.
Okay, I think that the interesting bit, this one in terms of hours equals value plus waste, is links very much to me in terms of accountability, in terms of who has accountability for filling those 4 dollops of time. Is it the line manager? Is it the project manager? Or is it the individual resource? And I think people have different views, and depending on what work it is, and interestingly, in some of the kind of the principles that we can put in place, is the default is that if you have no way to book your time, then somebody becomes accountable for your charge if there's a charge associated with that, which often kind of focuses the mind. So if you're not used on a piece of work, then you get charged back to your business as usual department, or if you're not charged, then it gets down to the project manager and they have to pick up your additional cost. Changes perhaps some of the behaviour. Robert, this kind of, when you're why, are you talking about why in terms of timesheeting?
Yes. People have to understand why we're doing it. Yeah. I've had very good results, and I've also had like violent non-compliance. Okay,
because I think the why also drives that compliance in terms of, we can say we want it because we want to record actuals for projects and we're going to use that for estimating on future projects. But actually, if the data is then used to jump on people for not booking a full 40 hours or whatever, so our behaviours don't support the why in which we rolled it out, actually that will change and how people kind of see that. So we have to be very clear about the why and make sure we follow up with the kind of the actions that support that why further on down the line.
So there's two things for me. One, I don't think I've ever met anybody apart from myself who's actually looked at any actuals to predict things in the future. And I will stand to be corrected by anybody and everybody on this call. The time I did, it proved that we shouldn't do small projects and we should do large projects, which I had to check 5 times because I didn't believe my own stats. And the other thing for me for timesheets is I've always equated it to driving by looking out the rearview mirror only and not looking where you're going. So timesheets will tell you what you've done, but nothing else.
Okay. Anybody want to add anything else then about the real challenges before we move on to the next section?
Interestingly, I've just made a note because actually the points you've just been making there is very similar to the ones about benefits management. What came out of that one is that the PMO, and indeed a lot of people that are working within projects and programs, are not doing that kind of translation piece to talk in the way that the business talks, as opposed to project management. So when you're like saying about it's not making resource management, i.e. the different tools and approaches understandable to the business, which I think is what came out of what somebody's point then, but that was very much the same kind of point made about benefits management. So it's just interesting that I wonder how many other services that actually the PMO offers and does, where actually it's not landing with some of the more senior people within the business.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be something we can kind of mess around and sort out, and they don't need to be involved. Yes, dealt with at the tactical level, on the strategic and cultural level. Any more on the real problem? Right then, gone. So next section. Clear. Get rid of that. The next section was to look about what the biggest blockers were, which again wasn't particularly highly populated, and their view was kind of the PMOs not sharing plans. And actually I thought that was based on the biggest challenges. I thought that was a very poorly represented perspective, because I think there's some much bigger blockers than that, some of which I think we've talked about in terms of those underlying issues. Any other kind of blockers that you see? Oh, Nicole, plans or schedules? I would guess it's schedules. Yes. It would be interesting, wouldn't it, if we did our kind of portfolio resource management on plans and not schedules. It would be different bits of information that we would hold rather than kind of detailed schedules. Anybody understand why? Oh, we've got a few more coming up. Business as usual. What do we mean by business as usual transparency, Adrian?
I guess it was individuals' differences, views of how much time it takes for their business as usual and what they're also committed to. And I guess if they're not able to share that from a business as usual, you can't factor that in.
Yeah, I worked with an organisation a number of years ago, who the general kind of philosophy of the organisation is we have kind of 10% slack in each of the business as usual departments, which is surely enough to pick up and input into any projects. Nobody kind of talked about this magical 10%, but it came out when we were starting putting in some project management processes. But as the economy got a little bit more challenging, business as usual very much found that, they didn't feel as though they had 10% extra headroom. And because they didn't do any data around business as usual people, they said, actually, we don't have people for projects. And they started to get very precious then about saying they wanted to know exactly how much time and effort was going to be required, because they were going to increase their headcount to cover off, to backfill for project work. So interesting in terms of, kind of whether it's just generally understood or whether business as usual are seen to, kind of allowed to plan and do that kind of backfilling exercise. So you've got things there in terms of the whole kind of dependency management bit. And again, I worked for an organisation. It was a pharmaceutical company over in Wales. I just went and did some piece of work, and I was just reviewing their processes. And at the start of the business case, they were going to say, right then, Nicole, will you have somebody I need somebody for 3 days off your team. And Nicole would go, yeah, I've got kind of Robert, he'll happily work for you. I'd go and see Rich and say, Rich, I'm going to need somebody for 3 whole weeks. And they said, oh yes, fine, Stuart will be ideal person for that. There was never a conversation in terms of when that person was available. So I'd go back to Nicole and say, right then, that kind of you know, those 3 days I need from Robert, I'll need that next week. And Nicole goes, well, he's on holiday for 3 weeks now, you know, so there was no kind of tie in between demand as such and when that actual demand was required. So, you know, if that kind of ongoing visibility, is data the real issue? Is that the underlying issue? You shake your head, Robert.
I shake my head emphatically.
Okay.
Small project shop, so I have to constrain that. It's sort of 4-person, 3 months, 3 or 4 months would have been a big project. We had very good data. And what we quickly learned was that the variation in hours needed to do X, where X was like hard to define anyway, was like a factor of 2 to 3. So that if you tried to do anything other than really coarse-grained, do we have like the right size team on this thing and the right number of months, you couldn't use it for coordinating or planning anything. You couldn't use that data. The past data didn't help you because the current there was so much variability from project to project,
Okay.
person to person, depending upon which team they were on.
Okay.
You know, I actually had data because we used to do function points. So we had a way of quantifying scope. Productivity, same person, same technology, same size of project, varied by a factor of 3 because it depended on who the customer was.
Okay. So the fact, so it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a lot of work, and you know, Lindsay and I have worked a lot with the kind of Martin Pavers of this world who are saying, well, actually, for a lot of projects, that actually data is the answer, and now we've got more data. Actually, we can get much better at using past data to kind of do future performance. And the other argument is that rather than just taking a small amount of data that we've got, actually expanding that and sharing data across organizations. We did a paper a few years ago, interestingly, around resource management. And one of the things that Network Rail had said they've come up with is that actually project managers no longer get to plan their project because they can kind of do the schedule, but in terms of the number of resources, they say they've got so much historical data, they will tell the project manager how long the project's going to take and what resources they needed. And the project manager then needs to come back as to justify why it's different from the extrapolation of all of the previous. So where you're doing repetitive projects, I think that kind of is different. And I think the challenge, and an interesting view here is that we were always taught each project is unique, and are the projects we do so unique that actually historical data doesn't work? So the projects that you were doing, Robert, were they all different?
Well, they didn't seem to be all that different, and that's what surprised us.
Okay.
They were all web e-commerce, but what it did show us was that we couldn't data collect our way out of the estimation and coordination problem, that it wasn't. And I think if we had data, and I've looked at data sets from other companies, and you can see this work is highly predictable. They've collected data on how long it takes them to do it, and it's about the same. The variance is very small. Other places, they seems like this work ought to be predictable, but for whatever reason, they got a lot of variability here. So the data will tell you, and you can't manage or force predictability into work that's not predictable, and the data will tell you whether it is or not.
So if it's similar, but is that, do you know, the some of the interesting bits here is the work that we're scheduling is down to kind of individuals performing in a kind of particular way, and that's the bit to me that also includes it, and whether it's that individual, the way they're doing their work, or the interaction between those teams, unless we kind of go back to kind of the good old Taylorism of, let's just kind of press the button and everybody does the same thing time and time again, it becomes very difficult to do that. And again, that what you've put there, Robert, in terms of those kind of formed teams is very much the argument that John Ward has around his lean management, is that actually keeping the same teams together means they actually do get more predictable in terms of their delivery.
Yep.
Okay. So we're now talking about dream outcome. What's the kind of the ideal dream? And I think the groups had some, again, going back to kind of data, this dynamic visibility of availability, not necessarily of usage, but just of availability. So who's available now in the next day, week or month to actually kind of to work that, and that being kind of demand versus kind of the whole kind of capacity. I think the supply and demand they're talking about now. Some of the, and again, it's amazing how this kind of jumps from level to level. That's really at the high level. Down at the detailed level is we just want to stop chasing for timesheets. And I think that, that to me, that's interesting. It goes back to some of the accountabilities about, kind of who's held accountable for the completion of timesheets. And all too often it's the PMO who get challenged for not having the timesheets in. Yes, rather than actually accountable of the individuals to actually kind of have them put in. And, if you kind of speak to kind of contractors, they're the first thing that gets done at the end of every week, because without it, there's some real implications, because you don't get paid without your timesheet in. Whereas kind of if you're a fully paid up member of the organisation, then the likelihood isn't any kind of any comeback on that. And then an interesting one, training budgets aligned to the skills from projects and not a queue basis, which I'm assuming is kind of people have been waiting for training. Oh, it must be your turn, Nicole, this year to get a training course. Or Emma, you're entitled to kind of your 3 days this year. What do you want to do? Rather than actually looking at the gap between the skills and capability of what we have in the organisation and the skills and capabilities of what we need. So I thought I didn't think people were dreaming particularly big here. Anybody got any kind of big dreams that they might want to suggest in terms of resource management? Because mine are much more, I'll put mine up there. I'm going to give you a minute just to kind of put yours up there.
I think mine would be more willingness to collaborate from HR teams.
Oh,
because in my experience, when I've got that relationship going and the data flowing, it's made life a lot easier.
Right, I'm just going to put a couple up there. If actually reality was what the plans was, I think that would help.
So you've got a difference here between a really dream outcome, and we've got also on the board about moonshots. So I actually think the start-stop button that Ken threw in there, isn't that more of a moonshot? Something that is just like way out there that...
Well, not really. I don't think so. So from the user side, I think it would help the users a lot if there was some kind of way that they could say, right, I'm about to go into a meeting. It's on project A, so I'm going to hit the start button now. And then when I come out of the meeting for project A, I'll hit the stop button and it will record my time, and then I won't have to fill in a timesheet. So in my accounting software, there is a sort of start-stop button functionality related. There was. I haven't in the app originally. I haven't looked lately. Nicole, perhaps you can tell me. Which enables you to allocate your time to particular projects. And I think if it was as simple as pressing a button, a bit like when people are playing chess, they sort of like time keeps on going on, and they press the button to allocate it to either player A or player B. If time just ticks and you can press a button to say, now I'm working on project A, now I'm working on project B, it might not be that difficult for somebody who knows what they're doing to sort out.
But I'm going back to my $4 a time a day. Does that not lend itself to a level of granularity that's not necessarily appropriate? Because a lot of the activities that we would do on projects, I would argue, contribute to lots of different tasks and activities, quite difficult. So it depends on what you're going back to kind of what Robert said in terms of why. My son's girlfriend is a lawyer, and I'll tell you now, she sits there with a piece of paper to the right-hand side of her and has to account for every 6 minutes.
So for people, for people who are working all the time on projects, possibly your $4 are good enough. But if you've got someone who is the enterprise architect for a huge insurance company, and they're an SME on about 10 different projects. Their time is extremely valuable and expensive for BAU and projects both. And if BAU are being charged for no, wrong way around. But you get what I'm saying anyway. There's a big price tag attached to that kind of person's time, so it pays to be accurate with it, and it might help. So I'm not sure if this is the right place for my start-stop button.
No. But I'll put it in there because then at least it's not going to be lost. And I know when I first started work several years ago, and I filled in my timesheet, we even had a timesheet code for filling in our timesheet. So, which kind of was that's
meta, man.
It was proper meta, but yes. So that was the level we got down to. But yes, can you imagine if we had kind of tracking on your PC, so it worked out what you were actually working on, so you can actually do that.
That's freaky.
Well, a sentiment analysis. Let's work out what you do.
Yeah.
Press the button when you leave to go to the toilet, and then track what time you come back. Because how do you allocate for that one in your kind of pressing buttons? And that goes back, kind of the value plus wastage just becomes an interesting challenge. But certainly in terms of making time recording easy, and I just think people feel, I just think people feel very exposed and challenged, because I think all of us have times during our day and our week when we're perhaps not 100% productive. And that drops and it varies and it balances out perhaps over time, some more than others. And I just think that level of oversight people feel concerned about. And again, I'm still going back to I think it's going to be my favourite comment of the night, Robert, is just understanding the why around that.
Louisa, based on the, I don't know if you're still there, Louisa, based on the conversation that we had earlier on today or yesterday, didn't you have a query around this, similar to that sort of start-stop functionality, according to logging when people turned up for meetings and stuff?
Oh, yes. Someone was asking if they could upload the time. Obviously, Teams, you can get a attendance report, and then have that integrate with the timesheet software and upload who was on it for that meeting, and then they just have to fill in the time that they weren't spending on meetings. It's not something I can do, but it was a good question.
But that person who was making that request, was that a projects-based person, or was it a BAU person?
BAU person.
Right, an SME sort of bottleneck resource like I was talking about a little while ago?
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. That's a real request from BAU for this kind of functionality.
So interesting, isn't it, about kind of that level. So just Adrian's point there that he's put in chat. There seems to be an awful lot of kind of talk about timesheeting, like that is the answer to everything. But Adrian, you don't use timesheets at all. So you've got no back charging. So, and I think the question is there's in my head, there's two reasons why you want to use timesheeting. One is to do any kind of recharging, so whether that's back charging or validating contractors or whatever. But the other part is to recognize, either to kind of check your actuals versus what you'd plan, to see if there's a difference, and to be able to challenge and question why. Now, whether that's to kind of have a story or an understanding of why your project is behind or ahead of schedule, ideally it's to have that conversation, but also to use for future planning, because we want resource planning to be improved going forward. So interesting in terms of, kind of what you have in terms of how does a project manager know that if I've planned 2.5 days for you to do a piece of work, that it's taken 2.5 days and not 3 days?
Yeah.
Or do we not care?
I get the question. I guess the simple answer is I don't care as long as it gets done. I know it probably sounds a bit blunt, but
no, but because that to me is that's where we're into doing what I would suggest is much more like milestone planning. So as long as we do it by a particular date, You know, we kind of said it's going to take 2.5 days, and then you don't have to get, you know, kind of confused between elapsed time and effort. So as long as it's done by Friday, we kind of think it's 2.5 days. Your manager's agreed you've got 2.5 days available, but then it gets to Friday and you haven't done the task. The question to me is, well, did you not have 2.5 days, or did it take more than 2.5 days? And if what you're saying is actually we don't care as long as it's done, then we're perhaps kind of losing some of the richness of understanding the why when things don't happen.
So from a historical review point of view of failure.
Oh, that's harsh. But yes, obviously work in a company where there's not many failures.
I'm not going to go on.
And this also gets back to an earlier comment about people don't like the truth. And that whole thing of holding people to the plan. We used to be involved in weather, and we never held the storm to the forecast. The storm did what it did. And the truth that people don't want to admit is that some of this stuff is hard to predict in terms of how long it is going to take, either in terms of hours or in terms of calendar time. And if the data are telling us, but we don't like that story, then we look for someone to blame. And then you've got more waste. It's just a downward spiral.
So is there value? That's Lindsay's favourite word. Are there lessons to be learned for looking at actuals versus planned? Because it feels intuitive that there should be.
I'm going to go back to your hybrid delivery one. And does that, you know, being an old person, I've come from the waterfall, and we were always told that you look to do that, and that's where there were various tools you could, algorithms you put in. Where you now moved into the agile world, and everybody moves into a team and they work on things forever, or until the money runs out. Why do you care? So is there a difference there between a waterfall world and an agile world in terms of whether you care?
Okay, and do we care? Should we care?
At all, or across
Yes.
those two situations? We should certainly care at all, I think.
We should care that we're making good projects. You're making good choices of investments to the extent that this is discretionary. And I want to know in the future that if someone puts a €100,000 proposal on my desk, or that I put one of those on the board's desk, that it's not going to be 100 or 1 million, you know, so that they make good decisions. And in that sense, I think it's very helpful.
Yeah.
When we try to use it for control and actual steering of projects, then unless your data prove that what you're doing is fairly predictable, then it becomes problematic.
Okay.
And as far as holding me to a plan, holding me to which plan at which stage in the life cycle. I mean, if we're an agile team and we have a steady velocity, then by all means hold me to the plan, because we've calibrated it and it shows we're running along smooth. If some project manager cooked up a plan without involving me and then tries to hold me accountable for delivering on a bunch of promises I never made, well, what's up with that?
Yeah.
In an unpredictable environment, no less. It's like playing Russian roulette. You know, I mean, I'm just gambling here. It's meaningless, demotivating too.
But that was what I was talking before about, kind of what I call soft baselining, is that we have the high level plan, but actually we're doing, you know, we're regularly reviewing that plan, and actually what's our horizon that we're prepared to commit to. So, you know, is it a week? I'm committed to kind of how much time and effort we're going to spend this week. Is it a month? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Because I'm not sure that not every organization has the same planning horizon or can commit to the same planning horizon as others for lots of different reasons.
Yeah. And sometimes your planning horizon that the business has to commit to in terms of allocation of capital doesn't correspond to the predictability horizon.
Yeah.
They may need to make decisions 3 months out when our visibility is really in a high variability environment is only 2 weeks. Like how fast do you drive at night, right? How far can you see? If it's foggy, you have to slow down, or you're gambling.
From
I'd
our
add
point
that in
of
terms of,
view,
because that to me is a great kind of dream outcome, that your planning horizon to predictability horizon. That would be fantastic, wouldn't it? That would make life a lot easier.
It would be beautiful. And the thing is you approach the gap as a risk management problem, not as a control problem.
Yeah.
And you don't really blame people when risks materialize. That's the nature of risks.
Yes. The idea is that you've identified the risks up front. That's where the challenge should be. If you've not identified the risks, and certainly what I'm kind of doing some stuff on around capacity management, it absolutely links to risk management.
Huge.
Yes, in terms of it has to. And I'm just wondering how often those risks are reviewed, because the alignment to the kind of risk review, planning and predictability horizons are absolutely key.
People don't like uncertainty. That's a part of the truth that they like the least.
Yes. Yes. And think if you're an expert, then you be able to kind of make a good guess at how you're going to get through that. Why can't I put that on the risk register, Nicole? Not enough resources is good, isn't it? Is that not a well articulated risk?
Trying to get myself off mute. No, and I've seen particular companies that just have it as a standard line on a risk log of not having enough resource. I mean, the way to articulate a risk, as everyone knows on here, is, what will happen? What is the result of that? What's the specific problem we can mitigate?
It was very interesting because Transport for London, a number of years ago now, they have a corporate risk register, which is public information. So I'm not sharing any kind of trade secrets here. But two of the risks on their top 10 risks was we don't have enough resources to deliver our projects, and we don't have the right set of skills to deliver our projects. But their risk mitigation against that was a whole kind of swathe of project management training, which is what I was kind of involved in. But it really was, that's exactly how it was laid, and it wasn't necessarily articulated. And we did have a meeting there and talked about there's going to be a cut in the budget. And it was like kind of, well, actually, we'll just cut all of the training by X number of percentage. And somebody said, surely we should look at, kind of a bit more kind of structure than that, than just kind of, the standard 10% cut. Okay, right, then I'm conscious of the time, and I said we could talk about this for ages. Let me clear that, and let's just have a quick look at the next couple of sections. So the moonshot. So this is kind of the something. How do you describe your moonshot, Lindsay?
It means something that is really far out there. I mean, I think it comes from like Silicon Valley, isn't it, where they put something that feels really quite absurd, but actually not even possible. But it actually then means that they're trying to get behind, towards a goal like that. But actually, they probably never get there. But it's just about making them go further than just having a dream outcome. You know what I mean? It's about, I probably explained that very crap, but
no, that's fine. So it's kind of it's like we're going to land on the moon without necessarily seeing how we're going to get there. So the second one, I think actually somebody's written in the wrong place, which I'm happy I put up there just to be true to the thing. So the kind of that moonshot is the whole world doing timesheets.
It's all right, Nicole, because I've put on there next to it, don't use timesheets at all. So there you go.
Well, I don't know whether it's don't use timesheets. It's just have no need for timesheets.
Yeah.
Yes. So just
they have their place. It's just not, there are places that need them, but it's just the whole default that I have a problem with. It's back to Robert's why.
It's been interesting in terms of this conversation as to why we've already got tied up in the whole timesheet bit. Why people think timesheets are the be all and end all of resource management, because it's about the actuals bit, where in my view a lot of the challenges are actually the planning bit and the demand bit that is of question, rather than actually kind of the supply and the delivery against that. Interesting. It's all in the work in progress and flow, and hours are mostly irrelevant. Who dropped that in while we were busy talking?
That's Robert.
Okay. Do you want to explain that, Robert?
Well, I've been looking more and more at lean portfolio management.
Yeah.
And I've seen team scale agile work where you can get very predictable with stable teams in a backlog.
Yep.
And what if it was just flow all the way up and down, and we watched the not starting too many projects or too many initiatives. We busted projects up into small pieces as we can, and we did everything we could to ensure flow. And if work items aren't going in and coming out and moving along at a good steady rate, then we fix that. And the hours just kind of take care of themselves. Every now and then we give a team a few more people or move a few more people over here and just watch the flow. And maybe for a few critical places where we have bottlenecks or we have to rebill for something, then we have to track hours, because that's how people expect to pay. But they're really not buying hours anyway. They're buying results.
And John Ward, who spoke at the conference, was very much, that's definitely where he is. And I think my challenge, and this is what kind of came up when we were talking about, what do we call it? I can't remember. I blotted it. The kind of different types of delivery is about whether does that work in all project situations. And I think that's the challenge, isn't it? About whether that would really work in all situations, or whether it's down to particular types of projects. And certainly one of the things Lindsay and I are looking to discuss is to kind of, is lean portfolio management the silver bullet? You know, not just for kind of resource management, but for project delivery full stop. You look so you're going to say something there.
Yeah, I was. I just put something in the chat. And I think for where I work on software and now in general IT, it's absolutely the future. Of course, I'm probably not. I'm either way ahead of my time or I'm just nuts. But for capital projects, building buildings, building bridges, absolutely not. Planning is cheap and accurate, and outcomes are pretty clear. Scope is pretty easy to define. There's not a whole lot of fuzziness in that. So it has to do with the predictability profile of what do you want, what's value in terms of an output, and how much does it cost to make that value. And if that's inherently not very predictable, then this talking about hours is just, it's a fool's errand.
So does that equate then, Robert, in terms of resource management? Essentially, we have two different mechanisms depending on the types of projects that we run and how we deliver them. So for the kind of capital construction projects, we would do traditional resource management. We don't need time, kind of get away from the timesheets. We don't necessarily need timesheets, though we would need something to continue to record actuals to be able to do the forecasting and estimates. But potentially they're going to be in better dollops of time anyway than this kind of continual kind of switching. Whereas some of the more bespoke projects, the more unique projects, are more aligned to lean portfolio management, and in which case, if we're delivering them through scaled agile and things like SAFe, then actually resource allocation isn't a problem, because our planning horizons are much shorter and therefore can be more accurate anyway, and we're dealing with kind of well-developed teams. So it's about productivity is what we'd expect, as well as the kind of the allocation is relatively straightforward because it's done at a higher level. And is that the answer?
I think that the answer lies in that direction.
Okay.
And that the answer lies in that direction, and that.
Fascinating. Any views, any conversations, and people who are on the kind of bimodal delivery conversation, anybody who's kind of dealt with agile and waterfall delivery in the same organization, different project types?
We run into it all the time. And it's huge expectation mismatches.
Adrian, just curious, your projects, what kind of projects are you delivering? I'm just fascinated with the no actuals.
Multiple, to be honest with you. it's common across the business, across the PMO framework. Really, it's a business approach.
Okay.
Yeah, but I got the piece of external resource cross charging, but because there's not a need for it, we don't use it. And again, that goes across all construction, engineering, procurement, logistics, projects, everything.
Okay. I want to go off and do some reading now. But let's have a look at the next section. Again, what didn't work was interestingly getting some consultants in to sort it. It just complicated it further and didn't actually solve the root causes. So that's an interesting one as a consultant. Not the answer. I was quite surprised in there that people hadn't put getting a tool in, because I often think, but I think it isn't just kind of resource management, putting tools in as a silver bullet, unless you've actually kind of worked through the issues and sorted out the processes and asked all about the kind of the questions that we've talked about, then actually the tool isn't necessarily the answer, but nobody recognised that. Anybody resorted to a tool thinking a tool would be the answer?
We've implemented for all the tools that includes resource management with it. And I have to say, it's been challenging to get it to work accurately with everything else, to the point where we've actually had more success horribly in Excel. We're fixing the problem, but it hasn't been clear cut by any means.
I'm wondering whether we didn't get things about what didn't work because we haven't got people who've embarked on it yet, so that therefore they don't know what hasn't worked. They're still trying to learn. As you said, it's the number one problem. So people are coming on here to learn and look at other people and go, well, tell us what didn't work so we won't do that. And people, so wisdom of crowds is great only if you've actually experienced it yourself.
Okay, I'll take that. So let's have a look at what have people tried that actually kind of did help, and this kind of looking at the process before implementing the tool, and I absolutely agree with that. And I know you said, Adrian, you're kind of playing on spreadsheets. We had a large global program, and I had the green and red spreadsheet, which was the week by week, are you going to be working on the project or not? And it took an awful lot of fun and games. And what that highlighted as we kind of had the red and green spreadsheet was the sorted out the governance and the process about who wanted to be told, who needed to know, who was actually the decision person of whether a person was allocated and which specific person was allocated, because there's kind of subtleties between those two. And so we worked with spreadsheets a long time before we put the tool in, which when the tool went in, it did actually help, but it was just because it was a lot less manual than actually kind of sorting out the fundamental issues, which was process, accountability and governance. People have tried just doing the single points of dependency or single points of failure. So looking at kind of the key resource and working out what to do with them, as opposed to trying to do it with the masses, where potentially we've got much more flexibility in terms of the who. I quite like this interesting one, planning in-person team building and social to unite the team, bring them together from all over the world, which was an interesting one. And I think culturally that might help in terms of building up trust, having the right understanding about what do we do with this information, so we're not just kind of value plus waste, about having an understanding in terms of kind of how to book our time in the first place, but what's going to be used, what that information is going to be used, and why it's being recorded. And this one in terms about planning at a higher level, rather than being too granular. And certainly when I was at Cadbury Schweppes, we started doing resource management, and the approach we took at the time was each project was separated into 5 stages, and even if a stage was 20 weeks long, for example, and Lorna was working on 4 weeks, she was working full time, so she had 20 days allocated, what we would do is we would flatline her time over that whole stage. So essentially we knew we needed Lorna 1 day a week on that project, even though it might be condensed in reality to kind of 4 weeks. And what that did is that gave us a good macro view of what was required. And we got all of the project managers to feed into that view. And they were saying, but I can't manage my project at that level. I said, I'm not asking you to manage your level at that. Manage your project at that level. That's from a resource management perspective. What we need you to do in your detailed project is just make sure that what you've got in your detailed project sits within the confines of what we've agreed at that granular level. So doing that kind of check between the two is what needs to be done. And the other example I got when I was in another organization was we were talking about maintaining that link between the kind of the high level view and the granular view. And we had a 4-week rolling process, which was a manual process, to have the conversations at portfolio level to project management level. And we came and we got audited and we failed the audit. And my manager kind of said, Eileen, slap, PMO manager, we failed the planning audit. And I said, and I went back to the person who'd done the audit and I said, I want you to show me, I want you to give me a reference site so I can see how it should be done. Because this is the only way I know where we can cover off some of those human issues with planning, rather than the manual kind of allocation of individual people. So give me a reference site. And he said, well, I might just have to pass the audit because he couldn't give me a reference site. So again, this kind of, it isn't just about kind of dealing with the data, and it isn't just a tool. And it is aligned a bit to that kind of third bullet point that, to me, there has to be some human element in this to be able to align the kind of what the project managers need at the granular level and what we need, whether that be project program or even at broad portfolio level. And our resource management processes have to take that into account, because we're not all automons who just kind of do things. We've got 3 hours. We'll start at 1:03 and finish at 4:03. That's our 3 hours. Pressing Ken's magic button, yes, to say that we've done exactly all 3 hours. So anybody got any other things that they can say of things that have helped? So I think what's kind of come up in the conversation is, we'll put it up there, is this whole lean portfolio management. That was definitely seen to be some assistance. Anybody got any either kind of strategic or tactical approaches that have helped?
I think I can relate to what you were saying then about the certainly from a portfolio point of view, having a flatlined resource view looking out. But I would tend to use further out, more flatlined, more generic resource, moving to closer in time frame named individuals, and probably still a combination of flatlined and phase specific if you knew it. And then by the time you got into the project detail itself, you'd be looking for, proper detailed views of and how and how long for.
Yeah. So that's a version of rolling wave planning, where you would have waves within waves within waves, and kind of task, project and a program and portfolio level.
Yeah, and the other benefit that brought was it secured resource further out, so you had less challenges as you got to it.
Yeah, and certainly when I used to do project management training, that was one of the things I always used to talk to the project managers about. It's just because you've got the resource agreed doesn't mean that life isn't going to change, and making sure that you keep in conversation with your resource line managers, yes, is critical to the whole kind of stakeholder engagement of the project to make sure you're going to deliver. They kind of think, well, I've been promised Lynette in 3 weeks' time. I'm not going to have a conversation. I'm going to expect Lynette to turn up on the Monday, is kind of not necessarily the best way to make things go as they can. Yeah.
it also gave other functional directors the view as well of what they'd be committing to going forward. So it helps them plan in advance. So it doesn't come as a surprise when you come asking in a month or two's time for that particular resource, then they can plan it in themselves.
Yep. Absolutely. And I just, to me, that trying to systemize all of that can be quite difficult. So keeping the human touch is quite key. And we've got Tempest Resource in there. We like kind of Tempest Resource, like they're kind of a sponsor. And certainly one of the things that we've already talked about is getting a presentation, and not necessarily because we're trying to sell a tool, but really trying to understand how a tool can help, because I think some of the things we've talked about today assume a particular type of kind of culture, and just because you have a tool in place doesn't necessarily address some of those kind of fundamentals. So it'll be interesting to see what some of the mechanics of a tool we can actually kind of learn about resource management, and I know they'll hear me saying this, that we could implement without the tool, if that makes sense. So kind of just to see whether the processes that they've got embedded in a resource management tool actually kind of helps address some of those other issues. Okay, so just conscious of the time, let's go on to the next section, which is what they haven't tried yet. So again, a very unsparsely, and I suppose this is people not knowing what they don't know. So, you know, kind of what have we've had, what have we tried that's helped? We've had, what have we tried that hasn't helped? What's on our kind of our wish list, or kind of the things that we want to try, but have kind of never got round to, or never had the support to do, that we think will improve resource management in our organisations. So Adrian, do you have a wish to try timesheets?
I was just debating that in my own head. And
kind of whether that goes up there or not.
I did, it crossed my mind. I was more debating actually whether I'd be more interested in trying back charging for resource, and actually would I get more commitment if I was paying for it.
Okay.
And I think there was a comment earlier on about it being used for project cost, which was an interesting part of it as well. So if it's full life cycle cost of the project and you cross charge it, would that secure it better?
Yeah. And I think from yours, Robert, are you typing in lean portfolio management in there?
Yeah, I'm sorry I overtyped.
That's okay. No, I can move that.
Thank you.
Part of the. Yeah. That's part of the. So the final step was what's actually kind of stopping people. Key was kind of senior management buying and understanding, and I think this product versus project mentality goes back to me, which is the kind of the thing that I've taken out of this in terms of, you know, kind of different resourcing approaches for things like lean portfolio management versus, you know, kind of one-off individual projects, or there's a word, I don't want to use the word waterfall, but I can't think of the other one. Predicted projects. Yes. Adrian, you've got not enough resources, just unavailability of individual. And is it?
Couldn't help it. Sorry.
No, that's fine. But so I'm just challenging back with that in terms of, you don't have enough resources to do resource management, or you don't have enough resources to deliver the projects.
No, I was only joking.
No. But it's interesting, isn't it, in terms of when we think from a kind of a PMO perspective, if we want to address resource management, it will actually, it's not kind of half an hour kind of back of the fag packet from a PMO. It will actually take quite a significant effort from the PMO, and not only do kind of the organisation have to commit to doing kind of resource management and their accountabilities, they also have to commit to the overhead that is required to do it properly. So, you know, when you said that, it was a real question, Adrian, when I was asking you when you'd say you don't have enough resource, actually resources to actually do resource management is perhaps a challenge as well for PMOs.
I agree. It is and can be time consuming in its own right on top of other things. And I guess if you don't adequately resource or give time to do that or overcommit on other things, you're just shortcutting something else, aren't you?
And I think the other thing I added in, which is the one I picked up from this, is Robert's one about why. When we went back to the beginning slide, you said there are 3 parts of resource management which were quite different, and we've talked about high-level things, we've talked about low-level things, and I think if it's going back to being a project, understanding what our scope is, because we're asked to do resource management, and we've covered all sorts of things in this call at all sorts of different levels with all sorts of different people interested, stakeholders I think is what I was looking for. So let's actually define what we're trying to do, and if we can define what we're trying to do, then we might have a chance of delivering it. And please don't change what we're trying to do until we've actually nailed the first one, and then let's nail the second one, whatever those are.
And I think that's what, you know, that the paper we did back in 2016 said that it looked at it came up with 3 different particular elements: portfolio level, project element, and resource element. And basically said if you want to, whichever one you want to do, actually have some of the jigsaw in all of the bits to get the bit you want, but your focus is on one. So the paper is available there on our House of PMO website. Louisa, I was just gonna, you put there interesting comment about not sure if it's worth doing. Would you like to just explain your? I think I know what it means, but I don't want to misrepresent what your sentiment.
Just seems like it's going to be a lot of effort and a lot of buy-in and get a lot of data from people, a lot of work to do. And then is it actually going to give me any useful information that is going to change? Like if I tell the board, oh, you know, we're short of 3 developers in September, are they going to do anything? Or are they just going to say, suck up? And we're not moving any projects out because we have to do everything.
No, and it's an interesting point. And I would perhaps kind of take it even more than that. I've just talked about, you know, if you want to sort resource management out, you're going to have to invest in PMO people resources in order to do that. And what's the great benefit from actually kind of sorting resource management out? So it's a bit of a pain at the minute, but we get on and deliver. So unless there's a real kind of burning desire, unless there's an issue about not delivering the strategy, and again, is it easier for the organisation just to throw a bit of money and get some last minute resources in to do projects and programmes than invest in all of the time and money to sort out resource management kind of processes and procedures with a tool? So, you know, that I suppose that's the question. What is it costing our organisations now for not doing resource management well? Is it good enough what we're doing? Great question to finish on, Louisa. I'm sorry, Robert. I think Louisa's just trumped. I love the why question, but actually Louisa's why bother at all is probably where I'm going to be. So, what next? What is it? Certainly from a House of PMO, we've had lots of stuff, lots of conversations. Lindsay's writing that all up, and she'll share some of the output out that. We are looking, as I said, from a House PMO perspective, we're definitely looking to have a conversation about lean portfolio management. About is it the answer for a lot of our issues that people think it is? Secondly, we're looking to get a presentation by a resource management tool, not for them to sell their tool, but just to understand the processes, the formality that and the structure that a tool brings. Does that address some of the fundamental issues, or does it help to address those fundamental issues? Is there anything else that you think the House of PMO can do and help invest in to improve resource management in organisations? Anything we can do to support people in PMOs? Now's the time to shout. This is how we put our next tranche of work together.
just to give you an example, what came out of the benefits management one is that they wanted to do a session on multi-criteria analysis. And also we are going to look at getting started with benefits management by doing benefits mapping workshops, your exercises with your teams. So that was from somebody on the session that's happy to share their experiences. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking for. So yeah, a success story. Okay.
So that would be interesting, I think. So when we did our resource conversation, we did have some success stories there, but they weren't around the lean portfolio management side. So I think trying to find a resourcing success and actually taking that from a resource perspective is something I think we can look for. Excellent. Look, I've overrun. Thank you very much for taking part of that session. It certainly sprung a whole load of things in my mind. We will meticulously go through all of the chat, so your comments and they will be reviewed again. I hope you found it useful and interesting, enough to kind of bring some other people along at the next one. So we're looking at low maturity on the 18th of August. So working in an organisation where we've got low P3M maturity. Thank you all for joining us. We'll hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.